Okay, so welcome to week three. Um, I want to talk to you today about your multimodal composition. This could take a variety of forms, and I'm not going to dictate what that is to you, um, but it is multi, which means more than one, and modal, more than one mode of communication. So a PowerPoint, for example, might have images, words, sound effects, links. I've had people do slideshows with music. Um, I've had people create websites. I've had people do blogs. Um, I've had people do flip charts with images and graphs and stuff on it, and then talk through those. You could do that and use and record yourself doing that. We get text, we get graphs and charts, we get images, we get you speaking. So there's a variety of ways that you can go about this. If you have any question as to whether or not your idea is going to work, just get in touch with me and we'll see, we'll kind of talk it through, okay? So let's talk about some of the different options. So, for example, the first, well, let's take a step back. First thing you need to do is consider your rhetorical situation. We talked about advocacy last time. So, who are you trying to reach? And what is going to be the most effective way of actually reaching the people that you're trying to communicate with? Um, so, as we talked about last time, if you're trying to reach the lieutenant governor and the governor, maybe doing a comic strip isn't the most effective way. Okay, but if you're trying to send out a message to the citizens of Oklahoma, maybe doing something in comic form would be a way of reaching them. Okay, so if we talk about comics, for example, right, you have the images and then the text. That's more than one mode of communication: images and text. So consider what the best way to actually reach your audience is going to be. Um, so some of you might look at something in print form, okay? In which case you would submit it to the Dropbox in like the Word document or whatever publisher, whatever you're using. Um, the advantage of print is that it's a very permanent form, okay? There's something tangible, there's something solid that people can hold on to. Um, you always have to consider your delivery system, right? How would your audience access it? How would they get it in their hands? Um, but print has that really a strong advantage of just being something very solid and very tangible um, for long term. Now, electronic, not as tangible, obviously, but the advantage of electronics is the ability to distribute widely is there. You could do a blog, you could do a website, you could do a Facebook page, you could do an Instagram page, um, PowerPoints, Prezis, slideshow, right? All of these are various electronic means of communicating your information. So consider if that might be might be an approach that you would want to take. And finally, spoken. And this would be like the flip chart that I was talking about before, right? Because in the spoken word, you're talking, you'll have visual references, right, like a presentation. Um, Harder to distribute, okay? But the power of the spoken word in front of select individuals. So if you were going to set this up if you were giving a presentation, there's a lot of power to that if you are a good speaker, okay? So consider if that might be an approach you want to take. Um, so let's talk about this. How can you design your text to, or your multimodality to reach your audience? What do they need? What is going to work best for them? Um, are charts going to, are they logos heavy? Are you going to need charts and facts and figures? Are they pathos driven, right? Are they somebody who emotion is going to reach? Taking a look at an example of this recently, um, Trump was not impressed by all the facts, all the figures, all the charts that people were putting in front of him, saying, look, if you don't contain this, we're going to have a massive problem. He basically blew all that off. It's like, well, people die every day, right? And then he saw videos of the hospital 7 miles away from where he grew up. And all of a sudden, his tone changed. He's not a logic driven person. logic is not what moves him. Emotion moves him, and specifically emotion that relates close to who he is. And when he saw this hospital right in his hometown, where they had a refrigerator truck outside the hospital serving as a mortuary, that moved him. So you need to understand who your audience is as far as how you get to them. How is your specific design going to work for your audience? Are certain fonts going to work better, right? Do you want like a cheerful font? Okay, is that what that audience needs, or do you need something more business-like, more formal? Um, are there certain design conventions that are going to be more appropriate for the genre that you're working in? So if you're doing a business report, for example, um, maybe unless you're doing a business report on a circus, maybe having pictures of clowns in there pointing to things isn't the best approach. Consider what design conventions are best, or what design conventions you have for your type of audience, or for the genre that you're working in. Using bright colors at a funeral home, right? Like if your font was pink, probably not the best choice. And how can your design reflect your understanding of your topic? So all things that you want to think about. Now, other things to consider. Number one, keep it simple. A lot of people, when they're making a presentation, I find this in PowerPoint a lot, they tend to go overboard, right? They do 14 different types of transitions and sound effects and all different kinds of things. Keep it simple. Don't overdo it. Now that doesn't mean don't take advantage of what your multimodality can do. You want to do that, but don't get caught up in the bells and whistles. Um, you want it to be intuitive. Use consistent colors, for example. Your headings should all be in one color. If you have subheadings, those go in another color, but it's the same color for all of your subheadings and for all of your headings. If you're using a transition, use one transition, right? Keep it simple. Your audience should be going, oh, look, they can do different things in PowerPoint. Yay! The purpose of the transition isn't to draw attention to what you can do, it's to make the audience's journey through your information a better experience. Um, Aim for balance, okay? For example, you shouldn't have a picture that takes up 90% of the page and then like 10% be text. It doesn't have to be 50-50, but it has to be a balanced appearance, okay? So consider how you might use balance within your imagery to make sure that your audience is keeping track of what they need to. Use your color and your contrast carefully. Um, my first PowerPoint that I ever made was so bad. I mean, so bad. I had dark colors on dark colors at times. I put text over images, and some of the text just blended into the image because the image had a lot of different colors on it, and it was about impossible to read. So consider your contrasting colors and how they work together. Especially avoid like red-green combinations. They're very hard to distinguish. And there's actually people with red-green color blindness. It's the most common form of color blindness, and they would not be able to tell at all. Also consider how things would show up in black and white, because some of your audiences, if you're doing like a business report, okay, if that's your form that you're choosing, um, people might print it off in black and white instead of color. And will they be able to distinguish in black and white between things that you're contrasting? Um, Use available templates. I know that now some of you might be computer whizzes and you can get in there and create your own template like that. Okay, if that's you, good on you. Most of us aren't that. So rather than reinventing the wheel and trying to create a brand new template, use what's out there. There's a lot of good templates available to you that you can just dive in and take advantage of, and that's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of effort. All right, some things to think about as you're creating. Number one, think about your font. Um, if you're talking about a very serious topic, using Comic Sans as your font probably isn't the way to go. It's just not. Okay? Um, Go with something more traditional, like Times New Roman. Times New Roman is probably the most common font in academic writing. Um, I actually use a variation on Times New Roman called Bookman, Bookman Old Style specifically, uh, because it's just a little bit stronger font, I think, and a little bit easier to read, even than Times New Roman. Um, so look at that type of a font. Consider what you're trying to convey. Now, if you use a decorative font such as Jokerman or Chiller, right? You might use that to illustrate a quick point, um, but really consider whether or not that's something that you want to use throughout. Maybe if you're writing, I wouldn't use it throughout regardless. Maybe for headings, okay? For example, if you were writing a paper on horror movies, okay, if that was a topic that you were working with, maybe you use Chiller for your headings, okay, but then you write the actual body in something like a Times New Roman. Um, you typically want between 10 and 12 point font for the body of your reading in a multimodal, in anything multimodal. If it gets smaller than 10, it becomes hard to read. Words and letters get very close together. You get more than 12 points, it starts looking overly large. Okay, and people are going to have a hard time distinguishing between your text and your headings. So consider that you always want to use in academic writing what we call serif fonts, S-E-R-I-F, as opposed to sans serif, S-A-N-S space S-E-R-I-F. Serif fonts are like Times New Roman, where they have the little markers like at the edges of the T, at the bottom of the T, at the bottom of the R, etc. Whereas sans serif fonts like Arial don't have those markers. It's harder for to read serif font or sans serif fonts for a long period of time. Serif fonts are much easier to read for extended reading. Consider your paragraphing. Now, in some multimodal forms, you're not going to have paragraphs per se, okay? But you can still think about how you divide things out. And usually that's marked, for example, in PowerPoints by headings and subheadings. Um, people, we remember the first thing we read and the last thing we read of any division. And so what paragraphs do is it allows us to know, hey, we're starting on a subject here and we're ending at a subject here. Many of you, a couple weeks back when I told you to work with the tutors, what I told you to work on was your paragraphing, because you had a lot of different topics in a single paragraph as opposed to breaking them out. Um, Consider how to use lists effectively. Lists can be a really good way of organizing info. If sequence is important, use 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 5, 6, etc. If sequencing is not so important, just use bullet points if it doesn't matter which order the information comes in. Again, consider how headings might work, a variety of formats that you use. Headings are going to be really important, for example, like with PowerPoints and Prezis. Um, you want to make sure that what you have under that heading, that everything under that heading actually deserves to go under that heading. If you have information that doesn't quite fit with your heading, break that into a different thing. And then you've got another thing to discuss, another thing to talk about. Consider your white space. One of the things that some of you struggled with was your wrap text in your images. And so you ended up with massive white space on your page. Like you would have your image here, and then everything to the right was blank, and you had text above and text below, but then you had all this white space, rather than clicking on the image, wrap text, and using like tight to where it would just flow around. You don't want large chunks of white space on your page, okay? So let's talk about using your visuals. Photographs, okay? Photographs are really effective for evoking pathos, Okay, they're really good at bringing emotions to the forefront. And if you have an audience to where you think that really what needs to be brought out is emotion, good use of visuals is going to be critical. Um, they visual or photographs help people locate a concept in time and space. They take a concept from being abstract to something that is very personal. Um, Videos. Some of you are probably going to embed videos in your, like a PowerPoint or a slideshow or a Prezi. If you are using a video, you can't just drop it in there and not say anything about it. Explain the video in a few lines. Okay, it doesn't have to be this huge thing. I mean, obviously the video is going to talk for itself to a degree, but you want to have some type of explanation of what this video is, what it means, and what your purpose is for putting it there. Um, Things such as graphs, charts, tables, these are going to be how you convey detailed and quantifiable, typically, information. Line graphs are really good for showing data over time. Bar graphs compare quantitative measurements. The pie chart, right, that shows how parts fit into a whole. Tables are very good for displaying precise quantitative data. And then diagrams or flow charts show relationships. Again, be really careful with the colors on all of these. You want to pick colors that contrast well, that are easy to distinguish from each other, um, and ones that still show up in black and white. Some things to consider with your visuals. Always position your images as close as possible to where you're actually discussing the information within within whatever multimodality you're doing. For example, if you're putting a chart into a business proposal, but you talk about the information on the chart 2 pages earlier, and then you have this chart 2 pages later, people aren't going to really connect the two. So one thing I always suggest to say is within the text, say something along the lines of, as you can see from the chart to the right, da 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 da, and you explain the chart within the text, referring specifically to it. Or as you can see in the picture or the image or whatever, or instead of as you can see, because we want to avoid you, as demonstrated by the chart to the right, or as the picture shows, da 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 da. You want to number all of your images, so figure 1, figure 2, table 1, table 2, chart 1, chart 2, etc. You want to have a title or a caption for everything that you have in there. For now, I recommend sticking primarily to captions. Very easy to insert. Typically, with most formats you're going to be working with, right-click on the image, select caption, and you should be able to caption it. Make sure that if you're creating your own chart or graph, that you label all the parts clearly so that people understand exactly what it is you're talking about. And anything that you don't create yourself, you still have to cite as an image. And any questions on how to do that, you can look at owlpurdue.com and it'll tell you how to cite an image or a chart or a graph or anything along that lines. Something some of you might want to consider is using music or other sound effects as part of what you're doing. I had, about 3 years ago, a student do a slideshow on lynching, and she used Strange Fruit as the music, and it was haunting. It was powerful with that music in the background combined with the images. So consider, for some of you, not all of you this is going to work for, but some of you might want to consider incorporating music or sound effects to evoke a response. If you're talking about a specific bird, having the bird sounds in the background of that particular bird might be useful. It might help us understand and feel and immerse into what you're talking about better. Some of you are going to also be editing your photos. And as you edit photos, or images of any kind, do so ethically. You need to consider how you edit images the same way that you consider when you edit text. Um, for example, if I said, John doesn't like potatoes, okay, and I edited that sentence to cut out the doesn't and say John likes potatoes. Well, yes, those words are in there, but I cut out the important part that helps people understand what's actually happening. And the same thing with images. You can't edit an image to where the image now misrepresents what it is you're trying to what it's originally trying to convey. Okay? So make sure that as you edit visuals, you're still staying true to what the image is supposed to convey. Now, some other types of multimodality that you might consider, if you want to do an Instagram account, if you want to do a Facebook page, if you want to create a website or a blog, all of these are acceptable. They're all different forms of multimodality. Um, so consider how you might do that. But is that particular form the best way of reaching your audience? Really understand who your audience is before you dive into social media. Okay. Make sure you're keeping up on your discussion boards. Make sure that you are setting appointments with both myself and with the tutors. And if you have any questions, please just get in touch with me either via email or just set an appointment on WC Online. This is part 1 of this lecture. There will be a part 2 that you need to go over as well, that is going to demonstrate how these principles work by looking at an example. Thank you very much. Love you guys. See you soon.